is not his real name. Those of you who are probably hearing for the first time, which always gets a bunch of new listeners, they think that Mark is his real name. Mark is not his real name. That's his radio name that we use. And
We'll explain that too, because we're going to tell you how he actually started joining us on radio. So, Mark of Anaheim, welcome back to WOL Radio.
Too strong, too black. And how is Mr. Nelson doing today?
I'm well, brother. How about yourself?
Dang, you use an adverb to modify a verb. I just love an intellectual brother, man. You know, I can't complain. As usual, just when I thought I was out, you bring me back in. And I just left a major surf contest. Family that I still have remaining. But, Mr. Nelson, this topic was too important for me not to be here today.
All right, let me tell the folks a little bit about your background for the new listeners. Mark from Anaheim, as I mentioned, that's not his real name. He's really not from Anaheim. But he is a retired U.S. Marine Corps Reserve Mustang Field Grade Infantry Officer, as well as a retired LAPD Patrol Supervisor. He has provided intelligence briefings and tactical training to various state and federal agencies. He's also briefed U.S. and NATO officials regarding the tactical application of less-than-lethal weaponry. He's also served as a technical advisor for LAPD training films, as well as films produced in Hollywood. But since retiring from the LAPD, he has returned to his life, as he puts it, a lazy surfing beach bum, where he has coached and mentored some of the most successful female surfers in the competitive surfing from around the world. During the Los Angeles civil unrest of the riots in 1992, most LAPD personnel were deployed 10 days to 2 weeks. Mark was deployed for a full month. Again, Mark, welcome to WOL Radio.
I'm glad to be here. Happy belated birthday to Kathy Hughes, and thank you, Kathy Hughes, for providing this listening format. And hopefully, you know, today we'll share some knowledge and give some people a better perspective on what exactly happened on 29 April 1992.
All right, but before we do that, is there anything you'd like to share with the listeners regarding the Russia-Ukraine war? Because if I recall, you predicted we're going to have a civil war and we're going to have World War III. And so far, everything that you predicted prior to this, since we've known you, has come true. So are you still sticking by these predictions?
I know nothing. But you know, Mr. Nelson, before we get started, I would like to dedicate this radio show appearance today to the memory of those folks who used to appear on air with you during the civil unrest back in 1992 and after the civil unrest, you know, trying to provide facts rather than conspiracy theories. And, you know, sadly, so many of them, Mr. Nelson, they're no longer with us. And I mean, a lot of folks that we knew back in the 90s, they're no longer with us. So today, in their memory, I dedicate this show. And to answer your question, Mr. Nelson, do I still see a civil war? Civil war's already begun. But a world war? Oh, absolutely. And, you know, I don't spend much time thinking about what's going on in Ukraine. Because back in the 1990s, I provided military intelligence briefings to high-ranking U.S. Marine Corps personnel regarding Ukraine and the rest of the former Soviet Union. So I've been warning people about this coming Russian-Ukraine war on social media and on radio shows since 2014. Hear that, folks? 2014. I neither support Russia, nor do I support Ukraine. And now I just simply sit back, pop my popcorn, and watch. Because it was on this very show, Mr. Nelson, back in the spring of 2014, that I told your listeners, we have U.S. military personnel, and I don't like to use that term military, but you know, that's what most people recognize, those of us in uniform, but I always say U.S. Armed Forces. And, you know, back when I was on the show with you in 2014, I reminded the listeners, we got people in 137 countries. And during the Clinton years, unlike what was promised when Daddy Bush was still in the White House and Gorbachev and everybody was sitting down and talking about the collapse of the so-called Soviet Union. You know, there were promises made that the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, they weren't going to encroach on the former Warsaw Pact states. And then as soon as Bill Clinton got in the White House, not only did the United States, but also NATO flexed its power in places like Kosovo, Serbia, Bosnia. And, you know, Russia could really do little because they were broke. And much of that financial disaster for Russia came actually from the sad, tragic meltdown of the nuclear power plant in Chernobyl. So, you know, it even went worse because, I mean, even in places like Poland, you know, they started putting missiles, not only in the other Warsaw Pact countries, but Poland. So it was sad because in 2014, and folks, for those who have never heard me before, I don't want you to believe anything I'm sharing here with you today. I challenge you to go do your own research and you make up your own mind. But Mr. Nelson will attest, and many of the listeners will tell you, since I started coming on the show with Mr. Nelson shortly after the 1992 civil unrest, I have never provided lies, misinformation, or disinformation. So I say that to you because the truth, Mr. Nelson, what you see that began in May of 2014 in Ukraine was a plan to bring corporate fascism closer to home to Russia. Now, during that time period, Putin annexed Crimea, and at that time, the International Monetary Fund, and then you hear in the United States, you had the John Birch Society, Tea Party, Libertarian-led U.S. Congress. They wanted to bring corporate fascism into Ukraine. Now, in Europe, they call it austerity. In the United States, they call it, laissez-faire capitalism. Mussolini called it fascism. And basically what had already been done in places like Greece and Spain, they were now planning on doing in Ukraine. So it's sad because, I slammed President Obama back then because, it wasn't even President Obama, because Congress decides where the budget goes. And President Obama tried to make several attempts to aid the poor in this country, the homeless in this country, including a lot of U.S. Armed Forces veterans. So Congress couldn't find the money for that. But they had no problem sending $50 million over to Ukraine. So for you folks out there who may not know this, because Western media is not really telling you this, there's been a civil war going on in Ukraine since 2014. It began in May of 2014. And since May of 2014, there have been more than 14,000 people who died in combat over there in Ukraine in their civil war. I haven't heard people talking about it. I mean, you would bring me on sometimes and ask me to share with the listeners what was going on in places like Estonia. Mainstream media wasn't talking about Ukraine. And then suddenly when Putin goes into Ukraine here in February, most people who could even find Ukraine on the map suddenly now are experts. So I don't share any information. I've been asked by several people to come on and talk about Ukraine. And I'll just tell you folks this, okay? Because I don't hear this in Western media either. I'm going to share with you a direct quote from Mr. Nelson's show back in the spring of 2014. Mr. Nelson, if your listeners want a better idea of what exactly is going on in Ukraine, do not expect to find it on so-called liberal media. Not here in the U.S. Instead, they need to do their own research, and they will discover that there are direct ties to the revolt in Ukraine between the Tea Party libertarians in this country, the John Birch Society, your fascists, your Nazis, and don't forget this name, folks. Here's one for you to research, the Ukraine Congress Committee. And if you really check and see who these people are, their origins go back to World War II Waffen SS personnel. I said that on this show in March of 2014. And I'm no fan of Putin.
Yeah, hold on thought right there, because we're going to take a short break. We'll pick up and talk about the 92 unrest on the other side. Folks, you want to join us? 800-450-7876. Speak to Mark from Anaheim. Your call's next. It's a big show that rolls on from Radio 1's flagship station. We're on FM 95.9 and AM 1450. WOL, where information is power.
The Carl Nelson Show, now available on iTunes.
Well, thanks for rolling with us, folks. I guess it's Mark from Anaheim, and of course, Mark's not his real name. His real name from Anaheim, but that's a whole nother story. You'll probably allude to it and tell us how he got that moniker during this conversation, though. But Mark, although it's frequently referred to as the Los Angeles civil unrest or the riots, as some people say, back in 1992. The protests were not confined to LA or Southern California, or California as a state by itself. Many of our listeners are too young to remember 1992, 30 years ago. What were some of the things which led to the protests on the 29th of April in 92?
Well, you're correct, Mr. Nelson. It wasn't confined to LA, even though LA appeared to be, as they call it, the epicenter. I mean, this went on all over the country, and it was in places in Canada. One of the things I remember most about outside of LA, I miss Steve Coakley, because Steve Coakley was such a barometer when it comes to finding out things that most people didn't know. And Steve Coakley uncovered, down in places like Spelman University and some of these other HBCUs, support your black college, they had files on all the students that they were given to the federal government. And the only reason they found that because some of the students who were protesting what had happened here in LA, they overturned a security guard shack down at Spelman. And some of went inside and they tapped into the computer that was inside the security guard shack. I'm not making this up, folks. Probably got some people from Spelman back in the day who remember this. And they found all their names in there. Now, these weren't subversives. They weren't members of any domestic terrorist organization. So why did they have all these students in this computer base that they were providing to various agencies? That's the kind of stuff that was going on. Now, one thing I have to say, Mr. Nelson, is I was teaching at the LAPD Academy. So I taught at the Academy from 1989 to 1999. And for more than a year prior to what happened on 29 April, I have hundreds of present and former LAPD cops who can attest to the fact that I tried to warn LAPD. And I told them that the four LAPD cops involved in the Rodney King beating, they would be found not guilty. And as a result, you would see the biggest riots in U.S. history. Now, except for my recruits, most people at LAPD ignored me. Nobody was ignoring me on 29 April 1992. However, though, unlike what most people believe, it wasn't really about Rodney King. Rather, it was about growing tensions, primarily because we don't call it South Central anymore. But in South Los Angeles, you had this growing tension between blacks, Koreans, and LAPD. Now, down there in South LA, there was a black female teenager, Latasha Harlins. She was shot and killed by Korean store owner Sun Ja-doo. And Du received a probation with no jail time. And that proved to be less time than a white man who had received 7 months in jail for kicking a dog. So to a lot of folks in the community, tensions were already high. But the message many people received from that was, even if you're a white man, you will receive more time in jail for kicking a dog than you would receive for murdering an unarmed black teenage female. But I have to tell you this, Mr. Nelson, those were just basically what we would call the proverbial straws that broke the camel's back. Now, I never appeared on radio shows. And one of your listeners, avid listeners, she kept talking me into coming on your show. And I'm like, I don't do radio shows. But sadly, immediately after the unrest, there were so many people, and the anger was understandable. And I commend you all, because did you all stay on the radio 24 hours a day, Mr. Nelson?
Yeah, for 3 days.
That's so, and you didn't know whether you're all going to be able to leave, because back then KGLH was on Crenshaw. And you all didn't know if you were going to be able to leave the station safely. And it was a curfew. So anyway, I came on your show on a Friday. You had open phone Friday. And this was in May of 1992. And the only reason I came on because I heard so many... So anyway, speaking from emotion, without really having a lot of knowledge or facts about what was going on. So on open phone Friday, I simply called in, and I'm going to share with the listeners right now. You folks, do your own research. You can't make this stuff up. 1965, the Watts Rebellion began largely after a traffic stop involving California Highway Patrol and a possible DUI driver. 1992, the riots in 1992 began largely after a traffic stop involving California Highway Patrol and a possible DUI driver. 1965, the first night of the Watts Rebellion, LAPD response was slow and was later blamed because Chief William H. Parker was at a fundraiser. 1992, the first night of the 1992 civil unrest, LAPD response was slow and was blamed later on Daryl Gates, chief, being at a fundraiser event. 1965, most of the stores burned in South Los Angeles were not black-owned. They were owned by white Jews. 1992, most of the stores burned in South Los Angeles were not black-owned. Rather, they were owned by Korean immigrants. 1965. After the Watts Rebellion, former CIA Director John McCone spearheaded the investigation into LAPD's response. 1992. After the riots, former CIA Director, and as well he was a former FBI Director, William Webster, spearheaded the investigation. And I told your listeners, I could go on with this all morning, but suffice to say, it worked so well in 1965, and since most people don't study history, it worked again in 1992. You were played in 1965, and you were played in 1992. And I hung up the phone. And I know you remember that. But that's how you and I got started. Because after I hung up the phone, there were so many people who regularly call into your show. They were like, who the hell was that? You got to get this brother back on. Because, folks, I'm not lying to you. Everything I'm telling you. And by the way, I run LAPD Facebook sites, some that are closed to the public. You can't even get in unless you're in law enforcement. And I'm not telling you anything I don't tell them. And you don't hear a peep from them. They don't comment. They don't say a word. Oh, they read it. Because I'm the administrator, so Facebook tells me who's reading it. But they won't comment because they don't want to know. Most of these folks on LAPD, they don't know. It's like, the proverbial you can't see the forest for the trees. But everything I just said to you was true. And Mr. Nelson, as you know, that was when I adopted the name Mark from Anaheim, because at the time I was in the Marine Corps and LAPD and working for some other agencies. And so I adopted a nom de guerre. Now, of course, what I didn't know back then was every time I appeared on your show, what did LAPD do, Mr. Nelson?
Tape.
They came down and got a copy from the show.
Right.
And I didn't find out until a few years later. Marine Corps did that too. So they knew. They were listening. I may have been using a nom de guerre, but they were listening. And they made sure to get a copy of every one of those shows. So I'm just going to share one.
So, before you go back, continue. Did they approach you at the LAPD or the Marine Corps? Did they approach you, ask you about something that was said on the show, or they just listened?
No, but what would happen is there would be people in high-level meetings, for example, at LAPD, and then somebody who was in that meeting would approach me later on and tell me something that somebody said at the meeting quoting me. And then I realized I never said that to anybody at LAPD. Guess where the only place I ever said that was on the show with you. Seriously. Oh, yeah. Oh, they listen. It's the Protective League, too. The Protective League is kind of like a union here at LAPD. Oh, they listened to when they found out I was on, and since you used to bring me on a lot on Open Forum Friday, oh, yeah. Oh, they listened. Daryl Gates and I used to talk about it. Yeah. Daryl was an interesting guy, very misunderstood. So one of the things I just want to share with the listeners that most people probably don't know, and I'm not lying to you, initially we didn't have active duty military here. We had the National Guard. Mr. Nelson, are you aware that National Guard were arrested in cities like Culver City and Beverly Hills during the rioting?
No, not at all.
All right, remember, folks, I ain't lying to you. And see, the thing is, it's been so long now, you can find this on the internet now because nobody seems to care anymore. There were National Guards who were riding around in cars, 4 deep, 4 people in the car, with Molotov cocktails. Some of them got arrested in Culver City. Some of them got arrested in Beverly Hills. And when they came before the judge says, well, we're under federal martial law now, and I have no authority over federal troops. I bet most of you don't know that. And I'm not lying to you. Now, one of the things that opened my eyes, on the 3rd day of the civil unrest, the LA Times printed a map depicting the fire patterns in the city. And I'm looking at this LA Times map, and I'm like, where the hell have I seen this before? And then I go and pull out a poster of the proposed Metrolink train system for Long Beach and Los Angeles. And it was almost a perfect match. Now, it didn't have anything on there from East LA, and the big folks in East LA talking their macho stuff. Say they didn't come over here and ride, because the Metrolink didn't go to East LA until like 10 years ago. It wasn't proposed initially. So in the old days, folks, I'm just calling a spade a spade. They used to call it urban renewal, because many of us called it Negro removal. These days, they call it gentrification. And that Metrolink system was going to go through. And if a black business just happened to be in that route, take the insurance money and move on, because this place is going to be burned to the ground. So I'll say this, Mr. Nelson. As you know, I don't really get involved with too many documentaries regarding this, because I've been very disappointed with the documentaries. But folks, I'll tell you this. There is one documentary I highly recommend you find. It was done by HBO back in 1995, and it's called The Fire This Time. For you guys writing this down, I say it again, HBO documentary. It was done by Randy Holland and Brooke Adams. Brooke Adams, she was the narrator. I still have not seen anything that could compare to that documentary. They interviewed the OGs. They went in the hood. They talked to people who were out there in the streets. That documentary will show you how all the plans from 1965 Watts Rebellion, that was the result of the McClellan Commission, to make sure something like this did not happen again. They all mysteriously disappeared from City Hall, and nobody knows what happened to those plans. And I worked the hood my last 7 years in LAPD. I was assigned to the Southeast Patrol Division. And I would drive by these big, vacant, empty lots that, according to the...
Yeah, hold that thought right there, Mark, because we're going to take another short break. Folks, you want to join us? 800-450-7876. Mark from Anaheim is our guest. And we're on FM 95.9, AM 1450, WOL, where information is power. Thanks for rolling with us, folks. Again, an education on the 1992 civil unrest in Los Angeles from the eyes of Mark from Anaheim. You got a friend, call him up and tell if they want to find out what really happened, how it started, and you know, the progress of it. Tell them that Mark from Anaheim's on the radio right now. So, Mark, I'm going to let you finish your thoughts.
Well, what I was saying before the break was I recommend the documentary. It was done by HBO in 95. It's called The Fire This Time. It was done by Randy Holland. Narrator was Brooke Adams. And in that documentary, it shows how all the plans to rectify the problems that led up to 1965 mysteriously disappeared from downtown City Hall in Los Angeles. All the recommendations that were supposed to be put in place, few of those recommendations ever came to fruition. And when I was working down in South Los Angeles, I would drive by all these empty lots, only to discover those were lots that were proposed for low-income housing. Were never built. In fact, one of the big empty lots sat right behind Maxine Waters' office for almost 20 years. And now I see her trailers and stuff are on that lot. I'm not making this stuff up. But more importantly, Mr. Nelson, OGs were interviewed in that documentary. And they talked about how down in the hood, there would be several unlocked freight train cars full of firearms. They thought they were going to go in there and get themselves free TVs, free big screens, free radios, boom boxes, whatever. No! Freight cars full of firearms. They opened up other unlocked freight cars full of ammunition for the firearms. Now, I can't say exactly what this OG said on the documentary because it's profane, but he basically said they knew what they were doing when they left that stuff down here. Nothing personal, strictly business. Mr. Nelson, they're doing it again. Since December of 2021, there have been freight cars left over in East LA that people now are finding unlocked, and I don't know what they're getting out of it. There's only been scattered reports about how these freight cars have been burglarized, and then various agencies are pointing the finger at each other for not providing proper security down there for the big freight yard that's over there in the East LA area. Folks, I'm not making this stuff up. So, you know, I keep it simple, Mr. Nelson. You show me a major civil unrest or riot, and I'll show you a major civil unrest or riot that was probably the result of some major controversial incident involving law enforcement. That's how they use to push your buttons. That's how they play you. They manipulate black and brown folks by having some major incident where law enforcement, things went terribly wrong. And then that's what's focused in the media. Now, mind you, I'm not saying it's justified, but I'm saying, believe it or not, folks, that stuff happens in this country practically every day. They decide when they're going to share it with you. And for like 2 years prior to what happened on 29 April, Mr. Nelson, I watched the local news. Even when it wasn't LAPD, they'd have an LAPD badge behind the news reporter. I still have a lot of those videotapes from those news shows. Sometimes they would even put bullet holes in the police officer's badge behind the news reporter. The subliminal messaging wasn't even that subliminal. Anytime a cop would go into a neighborhood to handle probably someone who was unfortunately mentally ill, but that ended up turning to a tragic situation where the person ended up getting killed or wasn't killed in custody by the cops. Oh, that was all you kept seeing over and over and over again, to foment the hatred and the anger towards law enforcement. So most folks, you know, they weren't really, Rodney King, you know, he was no activist. People were waiting to see what was going to happen after that trial because they're saying this was on videotape. Surely this time something's going to come out of it. And they moved that trial out of L.A. to Simi Valley. You know, I went out to that trial. I sat in that courtroom until they found out who I was. When I say they, other law enforcement. I just went there incognito because one of my recruits, one of my best recruits, was one of the four. And it's unfortunate because he was on probation, so he was just going along with the other cops in Foothill. But I went out to that courtroom, and I was sitting next to Rodney King's aunt in the courtroom. She had no idea who I was, thank God. And in front of us was Lawrence Powell, one of the officers, his fiance. She's sitting in front of, and she didn't know who I was, and she would turn around and do nothing but taunt Rodney King's aunt during the trial. I saw that firsthand, and I will never lie to you about that, because I have to answer for lying to you folks, okay? And the only reason I stopped going to the trial, because once I was recognized by other cops, they tried to keep inviting me to come to lunch with them, and I just left, so I didn't go back. But I knew what was going to happen in the outcome of that going to Simi Valley, and everybody knew that, you know. They were just waiting for the verdict to come out, and as soon as it happened, you know, things started setting off, so. And it's not just black folks, okay? White folks, you get played too. That's why you saw all those sad white folks who got played on January 6, 2021 on Capitol Hill. Donald Trump played you, and then he stayed inside and watched it on big screen TV and called all his friends that now we're seeing emails and phone calls coming up. He didn't go back out there after he told you to go down there. So you white folks listening, you get played too. That's what they do. And Mr. Nelson, I'll just tell you, because you know this. I stopped coming on the radio. But I already saw this happening with the tragic death of Trayvon Martin. So I decided, after more than 10 years of refusing to do radio shows, I came back on with you because when I saw the murder of Trayvon Martin and how that was being used by the media, they were setting it up for another civil war in this country. And this happened, because I'm going to tell you folks why. You're being distracted right now with, because see, I'm from South Carolina, and most of you folks don't know this, but Chris Rock is from South Carolina. So while most of you folks are being distracted with Will Smith slapping fellow South Carolinian Chris Rock, I bet you don't even know that right now, last week in South Carolina, Governor Henry McMaster signed legislation which now South Carolina has joined 17 other states to call for an Article 5 convention. And if that Article 5 convention is successful, folks, the federal government will be rendered basically powerless because all laws will return to the states under states' rights. Now, I know you got some attorneys out there listening to this show. I challenge y'all to call and clarify this for me, what an Article 5 convention is. Folks, I'm not making this up. You got 18 states now that have already joined the band to call for an Article 5 convention. And we got the midterm elections coming up. And I haven't heard anybody who expects the Democratic Party to maintain control in Congress after the midterm elections. So, you know, a lot of folks are sitting here talking about, well, Trump is done. I'll make this simple for you folks. Pablo Escobar was a drug dealer, a major drug dealer. But I think a lot of folks don't know he was also in Congress, well, their parliament down there in Colombia. How did he get in? He paid off a guy who ran. That guy won. As soon as that guy won, he resigned for family reasons, and Pablo Escobar was put in as his designate. All it would take right now is for somebody running in Florida in the midterm elections who wins a congressional seat, and then they step down for family reasons, and DeSantis appoints Donald Trump to take that person's place. Because as soon as Donald Trump gets in, he's going to be the one to lead for impeachment proceedings against Kamala Harris and Joe Biden. He doesn't have to wait until the next presidential election to wreak havoc against the Democratic Party. And if you're all listening to the show, because I know D.C. has a lot of folks listening, you don't start convicting these people involved with Capitol Hill and these Republicans take over Congress after the midterm, your time's running out. And I don't see them doing a very good job of a speedy trial on these people who they know on videotape and everything else who are seditionists. So, you know, that's where we stand, Mr. Nelson.
All right, before you go on, you said there's 17 states. How many states do they need before they can turn back over to states' rights?
Because some people debate on exactly how many states they need. And for you folks who may not understand what I'm talking about, it's not the same as a constitutional amendment. Article 5 convention, under the Constitution, if they get enough states to ratify it, and that could be a combination of two things. You could have a governor who goes along with it, or you could have, well, I'll give you a good example. North Carolina and Virginia ended up with Democratic governors. However, before the legislatures left the office, they passed so many laws that basically made the governors of both North Carolina and Virginia useless. They can't really do anything. Now, we just had, President Biden was elected in November 2020, and he carried Virginia. Now, didn't Virginia have state elections recently, Mr. Nelson?
Yeah, they sure did.
Did they vote Democratic or did they vote Republican?
Republican.
And everybody's acting all shocked. But Biden took Virginia. Yes, Biden took Virginia because there were so many Republicans who could not put up with Donald Trump anymore. They voted for Biden. But when they went back to their state elections, they went back party line. That's what's going on. So I don't want to come out and give misinformation on this because I need to do some more research to find out exactly what number of states they have. But from what I understand, sir, if they don't already have enough states, they're pretty darn close. Oh, and what I will say is this, from what I've heard too, since South Carolina now has become the 18th state, other states that were him-hawing on what to do it are probably going to now follow suit with South Carolina to give them enough to convene an Article 5 convention. That's what's going on, folks, while you're being distracted with, Hollywood. Seriously. Not to mention all the gerrymandering that's going on, because a lot of black folks, a lot of white folks, a lot of brown folks who voted for Biden in 2020, you're not even going to be able to vote the next time around because they're passing all these voting restriction laws. And Donald Trump's Supreme Court, they haven't been doing much to impede these states. There have been a few wins, for lack of a better term, against some of them that were so outrageous. But for the most part, these states are doing some gerrymandering that I've never seen before in my lifetime.
Right. Hold that thought right there because we're coming up on a break. And
Yes,
I
sir.
want to get into some more stuff. 800-450-7876. You want to join this conversation with Mark from Anaheim? Reach out to us right here on FM 95.9 and AM 1450. WOL, where information is power.
Listen to the Carl Nelson Show now on our free mobile app.
Thanks for staying with us, folks. I guess it's Mark from Anaheim discussing the 1992 civil unrest. And tomorrow will be 30-year anniversary since that happened. We're giving some insight in how it started and how it continued, and some reports that you probably never heard. And we're going to get in real deep in this as well. We'll get back to tomorrow. We want you to start your weekend by freeing your mind, think for yourself, and join us for another edition of Open Phone Friday. That's how Mark started as a guest here. We called him on Open Phone Friday. And we start at 4 p.m. Eastern Time right here on FM 95.9 and AM 1450 WOL. And Mark, one of our guests, one of our callers just sent me a note. They need 34 states, so they're up to 18 now, I guess.
Yeah, well, that might change after this midterm election. And, maybe they need 34 states, maybe they don't. Because, the way, there are a lot of things that we assume are the laws. I'll give you a good example, Mr. Nelson. As you know, I'm a retired Marine Corps officer. And there are actually less black Marine Corps officers today than when I became one in 81. But what authorizes me to even have been in the U.S. Armed Forces, Mr. Nelson?
I don't know. Tell us.
So for you folks out there who think it's the law and you keep talking about your rights, the only thing that authorizes blacks to be in the U.S. Armed Forces is an executive order signed by Harry Truman. Now, every time that executive order comes up for expiration, whoever happens to be in the White House goes ahead and signs it again for, I guess, another 10 years. But, Mr. Nelson, you know this much. If one president signs an executive order, what could a subsequent president do?
Refuse to sign it.
Well, exactly. So I'm not making this up. Do your own research. The only thing that authorized blacks to be in the U.S. Armed Forces is an executive order signed by Harry S. Truman. So many of the laws that are in these books, Mr. Nelson, I remind your listeners of something. Donald Trump has appointed people to the Supreme Court from the Federalist Society. And just like Robert Bork, they believe in the original intent of the Founding Fathers. And the original intent of the Founding Fathers does not include black folks, doesn't include brown folks, doesn't include poor white folks. It was about rich, white landowners, male, rich, white landowners. And for you folks who think I don't know what I'm talking about, for you white women who are listening to this show right now, You couldn't even own a credit card in this country until 1975. See, most people don't know that. You have a lot of young folks, they've lived in a society where this is the way it's always been while they've been alive, but it wasn't that long ago. It wasn't like that. White women could not own their own credit card in this country until the mid-1970s. And we still don't have an equal rights amendment for women. So I'm not going to lay down any money on a bet that you have to have 34 states, because they could just ignore it. It could be challenged, go before the Supreme Court, and since Trump's appointees are on the Supreme Court, they might go along with it. Because they've been doing a whole lot of other stuff that has been challenged that they know is going to lose on the state level or the federal appellate court level, only to go before a Supreme Court that has all these Federalist Society folks on it. And for all you folks jumping up and down, going, oh my God, we got a black female on the Supreme Court, you might want to do your homework. Because Lindsey Graham, that was all theater. You know, he's from South Carolina. Lindsey Graham is the one who put her where she got. Go check it out, folks. Lindsey Graham voted for her to be where she was to later on be considered as a possible candidate for the Supreme Court. And for all you folks jumping up and down talking about she's qualified, blah, 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 there is no qualification to be on the Supreme Court. It's a damn presidential appointment. But you guys don't know the law. So you sit there and argue and waste your time with that theater. It's all theater. You don't even have to be a lawyer to be on the Supreme Court. Think I'm lying? Why don't you do your homework? And I challenge somebody to come on here and show me that I'm telling you the wrong thing. It's a presidential appointment. She's not a convicted felon. She's born in the United States. She's more than 35 years old. She's qualified. Mr. Nelson, you're qualified to be on the Supreme Court. I'm serious. But people don't even know the law because you don't get civics anymore. You don't learn U.S. government. You go around talking like you know what you're talking about because this is the way you think it should be. Or this is the way it might have been while you've been alive. But Donald Trump kept trying to remind folks, yeah, you know, I can do this. I can do that. And everybody says, no, you can't. And guess what? He's doing it. And he still ain't in jail. And God knows he's done some things. I mean, if nothing else, Mr. Nelson, I would get him for taking personal stuff that belongs to the U.S. citizens out of the White House down to Mar-a-Lago. Hell, you talk about Nixon and the 18-minute Watergate tape? You folks know how many phone calls and stuff are missing from the White House that went down to Mar-a-Lago? That's supposed to be in the National Archives? But I'm sorry, Mr. Nelson, you had another question for me?
My question is just hearing all that. Why don't they go after him? Why is he not in the orange jumpsuit with
one, Mr. Nelson. I truly believe the number one addiction in this country, and I thank God I have no addictive genes, the number one addiction in this country is gambling. And what did Donald Trump own before he went to the White House?
Casinos.
Now, you folks, I keep it simple. When white folks tell me there's no such thing as white privilege, I just remind them, Obama wouldn't even be considered as a candidate, much less in the White House, if Michelle Obama had naked photographs on the internet. So don't tell me there's no such thing as white privilege. Number two. Now, I used to go to Gillies. That was located in the New Frontier Hotel in Vegas. Never gambled, but I went there because it was a honky-tonk. And, it got bought, got torn down, got replaced by Donald Trump's hotel. That was, 2009? That was 13 years ago, Mr. Nelson. Do you know Donald Trump still doesn't have a gambling casino in that hotel? So when somebody tries to tell me that Donald Trump's not corrupt, hey, folks, I can go to Vegas to an Arco gas station and gamble. But you can't gamble in Donald Trump's hotel because they won't even give him a gambling casino because he doesn't pay his debts. He can't get a loan from a bank in the U.S. He gets his loans from banks outside the U.S. In fact, well, you know, Mr. Nelson, on Monday they found a guy dead here in L.A., right? El Sereno, over at Woodrow Wilson High School. You were there?
No, I was not.
And you know who that guy was?
Who?
Telling everybody how dirty Donald Trump was and his connections to the Deutsche Bank. And now he just happened to be found dead at Woodrow Wilson High School in El Sereno. You folks think I'm making it up? Why don't you check that one out? Let's see if I can find his name here quickly for you. I'll find it for you later. But the thing is, what I'm trying to tell you is when it comes to Donald Trump, he's so corrupt he cannot even get a gambling license. Okay? So, when I say that to you, and he can't get bank loans from the U.S., he has to get bank loans from outside the country. So he's going to be loyal, don't bite the hand that feeds you. Now, why am I saying that to you? Remember the name Jeffrey Epstein, Mr. Nelson?
Sure.
In 2015, now this is before Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton were even named as the respective nominees for their parties. I coach, as you alluded to earlier, I coach female surfers from around the world. Most of my girls are like from 13 to 17 years old. And I posted this on practically all my Facebook sites. In 2015, how am I supposed to tell my young girls not to be hoochie mamas when the person most likely to become the Democratic Party's nominee, Hillary Clinton, is the wife of a frequent flyer on the Lolita Express, while the most likely candidate that's going to get the nominee for the Republican Party, Donald Trump, is a frequent flyer on the Lolita Express? What does that say about the filthiness of this country? If you have to choose between a Hillary Clinton and a Donald Trump, how am I supposed to tell my girls not to be hoochie mamas when a woman who's naked on the internet becomes the first lady after being an illegal immigrant in this country? Throw the rules away. Do what you want. So it's sad because I go on Instagram now and a lot of girls who I used to coach in the past, I don't even see photographs of them surfing. They're just, I mean, it's like kitty porn on Instagram. It's depressing. That's what this country becomes. It's nothing but filth, Mr. Nelson. We've lost all moral scruples and values. People don't know how to be cordial to each other. They don't know how to disagree and be respectful to each other. And so when you ask the question, the reason I mention all this, because who owned the airplane that was the Lolita Express, Mr. Nelson?
Was it Epstein's?
Yeah. And what happened to Epstein, Mr. Nelson?
Well, they say he committed suicide.
Right, but before he got committed to suicide, what had to happen to him? He got arrested, right?
Right.
And he got arrested with all these files at home, right?
Right.
Nobody talks about what happened to those files. So I've said to your listeners for a while, you have so many people on Capitol Hill, and a couple of judges on the Supreme Court, by the way, that have gambling habits. And I would imagine they probably gamble in Trump's hotels, and he's probably got dirt on them. At the same time, those Epstein files probably has a lot more dirt on people on Capitol Hill, on both sides. And I told this to your listeners, I don't know, 2 years ago. Whoever owns those Epstein files is controlling Washington, D.C. So I hope that answers your question why he's been on Teflon. Hey, McConnell's another one. Most people don't know. Mitch McConnell his mentor was one of the members of the Warren Commission. Now, this old guy from Kentucky, he didn't do any of the work. McConnell did all the legwork. So who do you think who knows where the bones are buried regarding John F. Kennedy? That's why they let McConnell get away with whatever he wants, because they don't want McConnell telling people what he really knows about the Kennedy assassination. Seriously. These folks don't go away. You take a guy like General Kelly. General Kelly was working for Trump. I lost all respect for him during his 1992 civil unrest, because Kelly was down here at Long Beach, and he had active duty Marines with light armored vehicles. Mr. Nelson, I was one of only 2 infantry platoon commanders in the Marine Corps qualified with light armored vehicles. I'm one of the guys who helped devise the tactics for that vehicle. And they wanted Daddy Bush to send active duty Marines into L.A. to kill black and brown folks, and Daddy Bush refused to do it. See, you folks don't even know that. I'm serious. And Kelly was the guy who was in charge of that unit, and he was mad that he didn't get to come into L.A. with those Marines and start killing U.S. citizens. I wish I was lying to you.
Is that why Daddy Bush only served 1 term?
That's one of the reasons. One of the other major reasons is the fact that they wanted him to go all the way to Baghdad. He had his 100-hour wall, and he pulled out. And the first thing that George W. said was, I learned from my daddy's mistakes. He wasn't going to pull out. No, seriously. Bush would not send active duty Marines into L.A., and Bush didn't go all the way to Baghdad in 1991. And the thing about 1991, the Gulf War started in 91. People weren't even talking about the Gulf War anymore, Mr. Nelson, because what else happened in 1991?
What else?
Rodney King got beat. Nobody was focusing on the war anymore. Seriously. In fact, Doonesbury even had a cartoon where they show all these guys overseas in uniform, and they go, hey, what's going on back home? I don't know. There's something going on back there about a videotape in LAPD. That's a Doonesbury cartoon, Mr. Nelson, from 1991. They weren't even talking about the Gulf War anymore.
Let's hold that thought right there. We got to take a short break so some of our stations can identify themselves. Folks, you got questions for Mark? Reach out to us. Lines are open. 800-450-7876. Your calls will be next. Right here on FM 95.9 and AM 1450. WOL, where information is power.
1450 and 95.9. Worldwide at WOLDCnews.com.
And thanks for staying with us, folks. Our guest is Mark from Anaheim. We're starting a discussion about the 1992 rebellion or uprising or unrest, whatever you want to call it. Tomorrow's going to be a 30-year anniversary of that event. Mark got a tweet question for you. A tweeter wants to know what happened to the 4 police officers after they were found not guilty.
Okay, and before the break, I mentioned about El Sereno High School. So, Woodrow Wilson High School in El Sereno. So, for you folks who don't know what I'm talking about, the guy's first name is Valentine, just like Valentine without the E. His last name, I'll spell it phonetically, B as in boy, R-O-E-K-S-M-I-T, as in Tom. His name is Valentin Brooksmith. He was found dead at Woodrow Wilson High School on Monday in El Sereno. Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Nelson. Did you hear about that?
No, I didn't hear about that.
That guy was the one who was a federal whistleblower and undercover, I don't know what they want to call him, because, I mean, he wasn't a federal agent, but he was a direct liaison with the federal government who was investigating Donald Trump for corrupt banking scandal. You can't make this stuff up, sir. And I'm sorry, you asked me the question you just asked me.
Yeah, the tweeter wanted to know what happened to the
what happened to the LAPD 4? Okay, well, Stacy Coon was the sergeant, and sadly, Stacy Coon recently got arrested in Simi Valley for DUI. So I guess he's lost his clout in DUI, because I never thought I would see the cops in Simi Valley arrest him for DUI. Timothy Wynn, I lost touch with him after the incident. And the sad thing about Timothy Wynn, Mr. Nelson, you can't make this stuff up. Timothy graduated from Academy. Like I said, he was one of my best recruits. Now, I was in the Marine Corps. I enlisted in the Marine Corps in Kansas. Timothy was from Kansas. He was in the U.S. Army before he came to LAPD. I mean, he was just a great guy. A great guy. The day he graduated, Mr. Nelson, after his graduation ceremony, I said, you're going out the foothill. Don't let those cowboys out there get you into trouble. Those were the last words I said to Timothy before he left LAPD Academy to go to Foothill. So I was really bummed because Darrell Gates got rid of him right away because he was on probation, so he had no employee legal rights. He couldn't fire the other cops. But Timothy Wynn was on probation, so he had no rights. So he got fired. And, sadly, for like 10 years, he kept trying to get a job as a cop. Nobody would hire him. So last I had heard, he was in a college taking some classes, but he was still taking police sciences. I mean, he never gave up that goal of becoming a cop, but nobody will touch him because they do not want to say they hired one of the LAPD 4. Lawrence Powell, he tried unsuccessfully a few times to get into some of my Facebook sites, but I wouldn't let him in. And last I heard, he's down in San Diego. And I lost track of Ted Brazano. I don't know what Ted Brazano. Ted Brazano's done a good job of keeping a low profile.
But do they still live in the L.A. area, or they moved out?
Well, like I said, Lawrence Powell, last I heard, he was in San Diego. Timothy went back to the Midwest, because he was from the Midwest. And then Stacy Coon was in Simi Valley. He just got popped for DUI, I think, about 6 months ago. Maybe been a little bit longer.
All right, I got another tweet question. Tweeter says, will you ask Mark what his take is on businesses or restaurants closing their doors to sit-down customers and jacking prices up? Does he think when people find out they have been played, will they go to the streets to protest?
Mr. Nuss, you have to read that question again because that's a little confusing.
Okay, here we go. Will you ask Mark what his take is on businesses/restaurants closing their doors to sit-down customers and jacking prices up? And does he think when people find out they've been played, will they go to the streets to protest?
Will they go to the street to protest about the restaurants? And, well, I think he or she has this a little backwards. The reason people take it to the streets is because they get played. So, I mean, if you're going to take it to the streets because you found out you got played, then you're falling right in. When people think they're fighting the system, you're doing exactly what the system wants. You come in and you demand it, and they give it to you, and then you can't complain because you got exactly what you got. I'll give a good example now. I didn't get to hear the whole show earlier, but Mr. Nelson, correct me if I'm wrong. Did you not have a guest on who was talking about declaring certain things as mental illness?
Right, violence is a public health crisis.
So, folks, listen to me carefully, okay? I don't know who this brother is, and I would like to think well of people. There are people out there right now trying to claim that racism is a mental illness. think about this. If this brother is successful in getting crimes, a mental illness, then the Ku Klux Klan can go out there and commit all kinds of crimes against you. And when they go to court, I'm mentally ill. Is that what you guys want? Be careful what you ask for. I'm just telling you, be careful what you ask for. When you think you're fighting the system, you're doing exactly what the system wants. You've given these, hey, that was like when people used to criticize the civil rights movement. They go, let me get this right. These black folks are going to sit there on the ground and they're not going to fight back and they're going to let us beat them at will? Let's go, boys. No, I'm not dissing the civil rights movement because I knew they were following Gandhi and the nonviolence. Okay, I understand that. But what I'm just saying is for a lot of white guys who wanted to go out and beat some black folks, that was like, hey, this is party time. You're going to now declare crime a mental illness? All crimes? And then allow people now to not do time for doing the crime, but because they're going to say, oh, I was mentally ill. I mean, we're already having that problem with a lot of people. In fact, there was some guy who just, I guess he suckered the district attorney here in L.A., Gascon, and they're using that against him for his recall because some boy was smart enough to try to claim mental illness, and I guess the district attorney fell for it and stuff. So, I'm just saying, I'm not telling somebody when they go to a restaurant for sit down. My thing is find another restaurant. I only patronized the restaurants that were nice to me before COVID. Because I don't want people messing with my food, and I don't like takeout, and I don't like nobody delivering my food. And by the way, I told this to one of my surfers. Okay, I was down in Oceanside for the Supergirl Pro, and I take care of my girls. So I'm like, hey, I'm gonna go get something to eat. Anybody want to go with me? No, we're gonna stay in the room. All right, you want me to pick something up for you? No, we're gonna order. You're gonna order? I can't make this up, Mr. Nelson. I cannot make this up. Girls, why would you allow somebody to deliver food to you who you don't know? And they laughed at me because they're all from Europe and they were from Peru and Chile and from other places. So, that's how they live. Mr. Nelson, less than 24 hours after I told my female surfers this, a study came out where more than 75% of the delivery drivers admitted, because they didn't have to tell who they were, that they mess with your food before they deliver it. I wish I was lying.
Yeah. Anyway, we got some people got questions for you.
I thought you had another question for me.
The other question, well, you want to? Yeah, let's get this out of the way first. I'll take the calls. What was your personal role during the LA civil unrest, though? What was your personal role?
I hid for 30 days. No, what happened was this. Okay, now I was working in the academy, and everybody was waiting for the verdict, tuned in there. I'm like, what are you guys doing? They're going to be found not guilty, and everybody's like, no, you don't know what you're about. And they were found not guilty, and everybody's like a sigh of relief. I'm like, okay. I'm glad you guys are happy that they got away with beating this black guy on television, on a video. So, we're expecting, it's a tactical alert, because especially things were going on at the intersection of Florence and Normandy and 77th Division, things were getting out of control. So, I'm like, well, we'll stay here in the office until they tell us where to go. You know what they told me, Mr. Wilson?
What's that?
Go home. I'm like, go home. So, I went home. And, I put in one of those 12-hour VHS tapes and started taping live on various shows. And around 6 p.m., I watched the LAPD black and white patrol vehicle in front of Parker Center get turned over and set on fire. And I'm like, screw this. So I called them up. I'm coming in. Well, you don't have to if you don't want to. I'm not making any of this up, folks. As I'm driving in, remember, listen to what I'm saying to you folks, because see, Mr. Nelson asked me this question. I didn't even plan on talking about this, but listen to carefully what I'm telling you. On my way into work, I hear on the radio, on a local news station, well, the first victim of the riots has died. The individual you saw at the intersection of Florence and Normandy has died from a combination of blunt force trauma and a gunshot wound. Now, who was at the intersection of Florence and Normandy, Mr. Nelson?
Was that Reginald Danny?
So, if this guy died from combination of blunt trauma and a gunshot wound, who the hell is Reginald Denny? Okay? I'm not making this up, folks.
Yeah.
So, just to verify what I'm telling you, I have the official, Willie Williams came in after all this, because, they got rid of Daryl Gates afterwards. And they came in with this report a year later about the civil unrest. And so I looked at the number of people who were killed. By the way, nobody was ever charged with a murder during all that. But I looked at the number of people killed, and then I looked at the stories that went with each person killed. And you know what I found, Mr. Nelson? One less story than the number that was posted. Apparently they screwed up because they put the total number of people who were killed, but they just failed to include one particular death story. I think that was the guy at Florence and Normandy. I'm just telling you what happened. You asked me to tell you what happened. I'm telling you what happened. Okay? So I come into work, and I go to command post at the academy, where they were telling all this. Oh, God, you wouldn't believe the lies. These intelligence units from LAPD. Oh, blacks are out there. They're breaking in the dry cleaners, and they're stealing LAPD uniforms, and they're dressing up as LAPD cops, and they're going to go out tonight and kill you. I'm like, what are you talking about? So they wanted to get me out of there. So what they ended up doing is funny. I was a P2. That means you're just one above a probationer. Okay? No stripe. But because I was a Marine Corps officer in infantry, the lieutenant that was in charge of our squad, he's like, no, put Parler in charge. Yeah, folks, that's my real name, Michael Parler. I don't care anymore. Put Parler in charge. I'm not making this up, Mr. Nelson. We're in the Leimert Park area. It's like 2 in the morning. There ain't nobody out, Mr. Nelson. Everything is quiet. And I'm like back, like in the Marine Corps. I'm on patrol. You guys do what I tell you. You'll go home alive tonight. And look, I'm not making fun of these LAPD cops. But they worked the academy because they wanted to get off the streets, a lot of them. And they were scared. And they should have been scared. But, they felt, I think it was a compliment that they felt that, hey, Michael Parler's in charge. Hey, I got him home alive. But the reason I'm saying this to you is we secured an area. Everything was quiet. And then I see a police car pull up.
Well, hold that right there, because we're going to take a short break, and I'll let you tell us what happens when the squad car pulls up. Got some folks who want to talk to you. You want to join the queue? 800-450-7876. Speak to Mark. Your calls will be next on FM 95.9 and AM 1450. WOL, where information is power. Thanks for rolling with us, folks. Our guest is Mark from Anaheim. You'd like to speak to him? 800-450-7876. So, Mark, let's pick it up. You're in the Leimert Park area, and the squad car pulls up.
So I asked you, no, I didn't say a squad car. I said a police car. This was a plain car, unmarked car, 4 deep. And, they were cops, so I just moved on. And these guys had a lot more time on than I did. So, we go out and we patrol our areas, and we come back. And what do you think I find, Mr. Nelson?
What's that?
Several locations in Leimert Park on fire. Anybody want me to take a polygraph? Because I'll tell you the same thing. Oh, by the way, I recognized one of those guys years later, and every time he saw me, the look he gave me, because I think he was always afraid that I was going to aren't you the guy who started a fire in 1992? I'm not making this up. I'll ask you, Mr. Nelson, is arson a black or brown crime?
No.
Who primarily commits arson?
White folks.
White males. So how is it, folks, that you all fell for the black and brown people burn down the neighborhood when that's not even a black or brown crime? You guys just fall for anything they throw at you, and you already know that dog don't hunt. Come on, folks. So let's go back to Florence and Normandy, since we were talking about. Now, Mr. Nelson, I didn't really think much about it as I'm going into work about, the first casualty, blah, blah, blah. But on the second day, they showed the videotape. And you could see, the guys, remember, football, Damian Williams and all those guys, and how he threw the cinder block and put his hands up and stuff and cheering and stuff after they hit this guy with the cinder block. Remember that?
Yeah.
Come on, you do. If you watch that video, you will see, and I'm sad to say he was a Marine, former Marine. You see a guy with a shotgun who fires around at point-blank range. Now, look, folks, okay, I've used a lot of weapons. In fact, somebody didn't tell you, Mr. Nuss, because you asked me about my role. During the civil unrest, I was a liaison for all the active duty Marines. Tell you something else you didn't know. On all those high-rise buildings in downtown LA, there were Marines that were using those as observation points. Because, see, they didn't know LA. So what they tried to do is get people within LAPD who were Marine Corps officers or infantry, those kind of, who know the city. But then when they realized they could never use me to do some of the nefarious stuff they wanted to do with Kelly, General Kelly, I still can't forgive him for using his own son, through his own son who died in combat, under the bus to gain favor and points with Donald Trump. But anyway, I digress. But I'm just saying, one of the other roles I had was, while other people went back to work maybe 10 days after this thing had happened, I was assigned to guard United States Army National Guard that was still in the area, and also to go to various critical locations that I can't really discuss on the phone around the city to make sure that nobody had tampered with or had gained entry into those areas. So, yes, I was out there for what we call a deployment period, which is 28 days. But yeah, I was out there for a month. I worked for like the first 12 days, 12-hour shifts without any break. And while a lot of guys would get their equipment, because the command post was over at, well, we had several command posts, but one of the command posts we had was over there off of Vermont. But first we would go to the Coliseum to get our equipment. And I'm like, this is stupid. So I took a shotgun from the academy. And since I live out in Orange County, a local police station here, what I would do is leave my shotgun at that police station when I came home, and then pick that shotgun up before I went into work. And I had a Cherokee back in those days, so I used to drive a Cherokee and had the shotgun inside the door. And it was wild, because I live in Orange County, man. These white folks, they know, man. I'm on the freeway, the freeways are backed up, and all I have is my flashing headlights and stuff, and they're like looking at me like, oh, this guy is a cop, man. And white folks just move off the freeway and let me by. It's like Moses dividing part in the water. Seriously. So I used to get to work every day in rush hour traffic because I would just go on the shoulder with my flashes on my damn Jeep Cherokee and take my shotgun with me down to the command post, and then I would get a radio there because we were on different frequencies and stuff. So on one night, we were down in Southeast Patrol, we down in Watts. And I specifically asked the captain from that division, are there any National Guard in the area? No. Mr. Nelson, we almost got shot down there. Because these National Guard, they were from L.A., because, you don't want to have people have to shoot their own neighbors, so you bring in National Guard from other areas. And these guys were scared to death to be down there. It was down in Imperial Courts. And we come in with all of our lights out on our police cars, and these guys thought we were gang members getting ready to do a drive-by, and they almost lit us up, man. And they had live rounds. Tell you something else that happened to me, because this is something important, folks. Can't make this stuff up. So now, I'm in a squad. All of a sudden, they're telling me to guard this one intersection. So I'm at the intersection of Imperial Highway and San Pedro, Mr. Nelson. You know how long I was left there?
How long?
14 hours. By myself with my shotgun. And there's no doubt in my mind I was left down there because this was one of their ways to get rid of me. And guess what, folks? Black folks in the hood came by. Hey, brother, you need anything? You be careful out here. Gang members, Mr. Nelson. Hey, we got your back, bro. Don't worry about it. Because we know what they're doing to you. Man, people on the streets knew they were trying to set me up to kill me down there in the hood. These guys came back 14 hours. Oh, in fact, they went back to the academy and left me down there. I had to get on the radio and go, what do you mean you're on the way back to the academy? I'm still at San Pedro and Imperial. They were frustrated and shocked that nothing happened to me because black folks pray for me. And those people on the streets know who's the jerks and who's not. I had gang members offering to go get me water and stuff because I was out there by myself with a damn shotgun. I'll tell you another story. So one night I was assigned to guard the rooftop at 77th Station. The station's long gone now. And they had me on the roof. And my job was to cover for the officers who were checking cars coming in and out of the station. Well, Mr. Nelson, with a shotgun, you don't want to be on a roof. Because if I had to fire that shotgun at the suspect, those pellets are going to spread out and also hit the officers. So I carried slugs. Oh, that caused a big controversy in LAPD. That parlor's got slugs. If he kills anybody during the riots, we're going to file charges on him. And they can do what the hell they want. First of all, they can't file charges on me. Deadly force is deadly force. And carrying slugs is not against the law. It's against department policy. So the best they could do is fire me. Do you know LAPD with the slugs after that? Oh, and do you know they never allowed me to go to slug school? And I literally worked across the wall from the slug school, but I had embarrassed them so much by having cops out there in the street deployed with shotguns where they shouldn't have shotguns with pellets. And when they went to slugs, they didn't want the fact that I was the one who even came up with that idea. And all the divisions started sending guys to slug school. Oh, and so I told you about the first night. And when we almost got killed by the National Guard, I was like, well, I'm not going to let this happen again. So I was a Marine Corps Reserve, and I was stationed at Los Alamitos. So I went over to Los Alamitos, and I said, hey, I want a pair of night vision goggles. Oh, my God. That's like asking to go into Fort Knox and asking for $1 million. And this guy who's active duty refused to give me a pair of night vision goggles. I don't know who talked to who, Mr. Nelson, but all I know is I get a phone call at home. Hello? Yeah, we'd like to speak to, I think it was a captain at the time. We'd like to speak to Captain Parler. This is he. And I don't even remember his name, Mr. Nelson. You can't make this stuff up, man. Some general at the Pentagon, Marine Corps general at the Pentagon. Well, I understand you got some problems down there in L.A. Is that true, cowboy? Yes, sir. We heard you wanted to get a pair of a set of night vision goggles from this reserve unit over Los Alamitos. That's true, sir. You go back over there and you tell that boy to give you whatever you want. So I had night vision goggles during the civil unrest from the Marine Corps. And this guy over there who was active duty, because I'm a reservist, he was angry, but he had no choice because some unknown general at the Pentagon told them to give me whatever I wanted. So when we went back in other areas later on, I was able to spot National Guard who were out in the dark so that we didn't have what was called a friendly fire between LAPD cops and National Guard. And so what happened later on, though, I got orders to Kuwait. Because remember, the Gulf War was going on, and I'm still a reserve. I was a captain. So I got a telegram at the academy telling me, how soon can you report to go over to Kuwait? And I sent the telegram back, as soon as this damn rioting is over. The next day I get a telegram from headquarters Marine Corps. Disregard, cowboy. You can't make this stuff up, man. But so going back to what you were saying, though, and what I was saying about Florence and Normandy. You know, everything I'm telling you, see, I used to tell Dick Gregory, and he would share with you guys so it didn't come from me because I didn't want to get in trouble. And I'll never forget the joke that Dick Gregory said after I told him this story about he said, you know, if I can't have a tank, please, God, let me have a cement truck and driving through an intersection. Because that guy was driving a cement truck. Do you remember the story they told us on the news, Mr. Nelson, how they got him out that intersection after he was beaten to a pulp? Do you remember that?
Yeah.
What story did you hear, Mr.
Nelson? He was just driving and they snatched him out of the truck and just beat him up. But that's not what I asked you. How did he get out of the intersection? Oh, how he got out of the I don't think he got out of the intersection. I'm recording. Let me tell you what the story was. A husband and wife, good black Samaritans, they grabbed him and they put him in his truck. But he was beaten so badly he was not able to see and he couldn't drive. So they were his eyes and ears as he drove the cement truck because the black guy and his wife couldn't operate a cement truck and they didn't know how to drive it. So he drove the truck while they were his eyes and ears. You don't remember that story? Yeah, I remember the story now, yeah. Hey, folks, because I got to have Carl Nelson corroborate. Dude, you can't make this up. So I'm going to ask you, Mr. Nelson. I don't even want to know what kind of car you drive. Would you let me put a blindfold on you and let me be your eyes and ears while you drive your car? Hell no. but we're supposed to believe that a guy was beaten so badly that he was blinded and couldn't see because of blood in his eyes and everything else, but a husband and wife were good Samaritans, and they were his eyes and ears while he drove that cement truck out of the intersection at Florence and Normandy. Hey, man, first casualty of war is the truth. We're coming up on a break, and we still got some folks who want to talk to you. 800-450-7876. You want to speak to Mark, you're online. We'll get to you next after the short break right here on FM 95.9 and AM 1450 WOL, where information is power. And thanks for staying with us, folks. 800-450-7876. Speak to Mark from Anaheim. Mark, as I mentioned, a bunch of folks who want to talk to you, so let's go to the calls. Tariq is on line 2. He's calling from Texas. Tariq, you have a question for Mark?
Yes, good afternoon, gentlemen. I have two questions for Mark. Forgive me if I digress because I missed the first part of the show. Mark, if you can you talk about some history I found out about Ukraine and this thing called the Patriotic War and Ukraine's connection with the Nazis? Now, I think there was some connection between the two countries and the Nazis back during World War II. And if you can explain that. And also, like my last question is, I know about 10 years ago I heard Dick Gregory talk about a lot of black folks that got arrested during the riot, and a lot of those brothers were never found. And coincidentally, somebody from the New York Times reported on it. Do you have any idea, or can you speculate on what happened to all of those people that was arrested? I think it was in the tens of thousands that were never counted.
All right. Well, yeah. So earlier I talked about the connection between Ukraine and direct ties to the Waffen-SS in World War II, because I actually came on. I actually came on this show with Mr. Nelson back in 2014 and told the listeners that. That's why I love Facebook, because Facebook documents the date and time. And after I did that show with Mr. Nelson, I went back and checked, and sure enough, on March 12, 2014, I came on this radio station and said, "You will not get the truth of what's going on in Ukraine, but you will find direct ties to the John Birch Society, a lot of neo-Nazis in this country, and also direct ties to the Waffen-SS from World War II." And Zelensky has cut deals with a lot of them. And the U.S. knows this. The U.S. knows that a lot of those militia groups, because they're not actually part of the Ukrainian army, but they're militia groups, they're hardcore Nazis. Seriously. And as far as in the second question, I can't corroborate anything regarding, especially the numbers of thousands, but what I will say is this, and this is what I used to always say when Carl Nelson bring on Ted Hayes. In 1984, we had the Olympics. There were no homeless in L.A. during the Olympics. And by the way, that's why they're cleaning up the homeless right now, because LA has the contract to get the Olympics in 2028. And I told you, listen,
the World Cup is coming also.
So there'll be no homeless here. And then in '87 we had the Pope visit. There were no homeless in LA when the Pope came to visit. And you would think of all, those are the people more than anybody else who would be inspired by the Pope coming out and reaching out to them. But they were gone. And I used to ask this to Ted Hayes all the time. He could never come up with an answer. And then number 3, during the civil unrest, we had curfew. I didn't see any homeless when I was out there in the streets during the civil unrest. And I asked Ted Hayes, why don't you tell Carl Nelson what happened to him? And the closest Ted Hayes would just say, a lot of them were taken out to the Mojave Desert. That's what he said. And it's funny, well, not funny, but recently we had an incident here in Southern California where a guy who's a serial pedophile, he was released from prison, and he was supposed to go to a halfway house where he lived, well, the area he lives in. Well, these white folks down here in Orange County didn't want that. Guess where they sent him? Up to 29 Palms in the Mojave Desert. And those people up in 29 Palms said, look, and that's for the first time I started connecting the dots to what Ted Hayes says, because I run a Marine Corps Base 29 Palms Facebook site, and I run an Inland Empire. And somebody goes, look, you sent all these criminals out here during the damn civil unrest. We don't need no criminals who don't even live in our area coming up here who are pedophiles. Somebody actually posted that on one of my sites. So maybe Ted Hayes had some legitimacy to his answer. They scooped him up off the street and just dumped him out in the desert.
Wow. Thanks, Tariq. We got to keep moving.
Could it be a possible?
Tariq, we got to keep moving. Sorry, man. We got a bunch of folks who are trying to get to Mark. I think you got 2 questions in. 800-450-7876. Ray's next. He's come from Miami. He's on line 3. Ray, you got a question for Mark?
Yes, I do. Hey, Mark, how you doing, my brother? What you're saying is exactly what happened here in Miami in 1980 with the McDuffie riots. The exact scenario. The 4 cops who killed a man who admitted to killing him, the other 16 officers who turned state evidence and spoke the truth. They lost their jobs. The 4 got jobs in other counties, other cities. And the trains that were left on the tracks in Liberty City, full of guns, ammunition, and it was the same setup, and I believe it's the same setup that's going on right now all over this country at the hands of the same people. The question is, what are we going to do about it, or so much about it, but what are we going to do to defend ourselves, if anything, at this point?
Thanks, Ray. Is Mark still there? Okay, I'm not hearing Mark.
Hello?
Mark?
You got me now? I'm back?
Yeah, we got you now. Yeah, okay, cool. Yeah.
Was it something I said? In fact, I'm surprised I'm surprised we went this long. No, we just got disconnected. Click. I heard the clicking noises when Tariq was calling in, and then it got louder and louder, and then all of a sudden, we're gone. Hi, guys, I'm back. Get that White House tape going again. Ready for the next call, Mr. Nelson?
Yeah, did you hear it was Ray from Miami? He says the same thing.
No, I didn't hear any of that. No, I heard nothing.
Oh, and he's gone. He was just collaborating what you're saying. The same thing would be the weapons found down there during the McDuffie riots.
Oh, yeah. But now, for you folks out there, Mr. Nelson, McDuffie, and he was a Marine, former Marine. So, you know, LAPD used to brag about the riots, and LA sheriffs, too. I'm going to tell you guys straight out, no police department in this country had more experiencing when it comes to civil unrest and rioting than Dade County law enforcement, because they had to deal with the Madioletos and Cubans and just so many other people who were always constantly rioting. And, you know, Miami, Mr. Nelson, that's like the number one, the CIA recruiting station. Like University of Miami was the number one recruiting CIA station. No, seriously, we have more CIA in Dade County than we have in the D.C. area. I don't know if that's true anymore, but no, back then. And so when they had the rioting with McDuffie, who was killed by the local cops, and it was a tragic killing. Yeah, I had people from Florida tell me there were freight cars left down in Florida unattended that had all kinds of weapons and ammunition to go with it.
Wow. 800-450-7876. Pamela's next. She's calling from Upper Marlboro. She's on line 4. Pamela, you have a question for Mark?
Thank you for taking my call. I've heard you mention the Federalist Society before. Can you talk about Scalia's relationship with the Federalist Society and or the Heritage Corporation as well? I've heard something to the effect that in the beginning when they were being founded, they would gather conservative law students and have these private gatherings, I guess, to strengthen their talking points. Can you just elaborate, especially with Scalia, because he seems to be highly praised and revered in those circles? I'll take the answer on the air.
Yes, ma'am. So I always give credit where credit's due. In fact, I just had this conversation on Monday. I was taking some relatives to LAX, and I said, look, I'm not a member of the Nation of Islam. I never have been. Those brothers have always respected me. And you know, Mr. Nelson, you remember Shadid, a.k.a. Gary Barber. And I just have to tell the story real quick, folks, because it's sad. I mean, Shadid used to sell bean pies in the Willowbrook area. That's the unincorporated area between Compton and Watts. And, he used to listen to me on the show all the time. He was one of my biggest fans. In fact, when he was in prison during a major prison riot, Johnny Spain from the Black Panthers, Shadid got stabbed in the eye, and Johnny Spain was the one who saved his life that day in the big prison riot. So, Shadid did time. Shadid was Muslim. His wife was a Christian, and they never had a problem. They were married until he died. Well, now that I was a sergeant down in Southeast Division, this is like 2005, I pull into the parking lot where Shadid is selling bean pies. Now remember, that's Willowbrook area. That's not LAPD's area. That's the sheriff's area. So already all the black folks are like, what the heck are you doing over here, blah, blah, blah. So I get up there. It's so sad when I tell the story, but I love it. But I go, put the bean pie down and turn around and put your hands behind your back. And everybody's like, what is he doing? This brother ain't bothering nobody. And you know the sad thing, Mr. Nelson? Shadid didn't ask no questions, man. He just put the bean pie down, turned around, put his hands behind his back. So I walk up to him quietly, and not a big crowd is gathering. These black folks are hot, okay, because they don't like LAPD anyway, and it's not LAPD area. So I get up to Shadid, and I grab his two hands behind his back, and I go, so I hear you always wanted to meet Mark from Anaheim. And then this big smile, because he recognizes my voice now, and he turns around, and we give each other a big hug, and people in the parking lot didn't have a clue. They didn't know what to do. Well, I gave him my business card, and Mr. Nelson is sad but is happy. I can't begin to tell you how many times he contacted me and says, hey, bro, man, these cops were out here mess with me, and then as soon as they found out I knew you, they were gone. Nobody ever bothers me anymore. See, that's what I tried to do when I was in the hood. No white cop or black cop ever disrespected anybody who was working under my supervision. But I say that to you because I still wasn't ever a member of the Nation of Islam. And, I knew a lot of the Nation of Islam. And when Thurgood Marshall was on the Supreme Court, he knew he was ill, and he refused to retire because he wanted to wait until Jimmy Carter got reelected. Jimmy Carter didn't get reelected, so Reagan was going to appoint Robert Bork, and I mentioned that name earlier. Robert Bork came right out and said, if I'm on the Supreme Court, I will ensure that the original intent of the Founding Fathers will be carried out. It was Minister Louis Farrakhan, more than anybody else in this country, who led the charge that stopped Bork from getting on the Supreme Court. That's how Clarence Thomas got on. Most people don't even know that. But see, back then, Mr. Nelson, people were still awake. This was the early 80s. Now, everybody that Trump's appointed is a member of the Federalist Society. We wouldn't even have tolerated that back then. Now, as far as Scalia goes, I tell people all the time to go back and watch the movie Pelican Brief, because when I think of Scalia, I think of Pelican Brief. In that movie Pelican Brief, people on the Supreme Court were being murdered to be replaced by somebody who would rule in favor of the corporate fascists. Now, if you don't know this, Scalia was down on a Bohemian Grove ranch down in Texas that's owned by Poindexter. Admiral Poindexter is one of the prominent criminals that Daddy Bush pardoned after the Iran-Contra debacle. And the reason, by the way, for you folks who know this, because Daddy Bush and I won't say we were close, but we communicated a lot. And Daddy Bush pardoned them because he would have been indicted.
Hold that thought about Daddy Bush. I'll let you pick it up on the other side of this short break on FM 95.9 and AM 1450 WOL, where information is power. All right. Freeing your mind, thinking for yourself, and join us for another edition of Open Forum Friday. We start promptly at 4 p.m. Eastern Time, right here on FM 95.9 and AM 1450 WOL. That's how we found Mark from Anaheim. But Mark, before we let you will tell us, I'll let you finish your thought.
Well, what happened was, I should tell you folks that if you want to get in touch with me, you can find me at Mark from Anaheim, Political Sarcasm 101. That's on Facebook. It's both a fan page and a group site. Mark from Anaheim, Political Sarcasm 101. And I'll try to answer your questions. I'll steer you in the right direction. Also, a lot of people want to know about the bug-out bag. What they should have in the bug-out bag. So I'll send that information to you. And I don't do anything. Nothing I do I charge anybody for. So getting back to Scalia. Scalia was down on the Bohemian Grove Ranch owned by Poindexter. Now, recognize the name William Barr, Mr. Nelson?
Sure. He was just in the news, recently.
Well, what was he during the Trump administration?
Attorney General?
Yeah. See, folks, these people don't go away. I recognize these people. So anyway, when Daddy Bush, what happened was, because William Colby, this week was the anniversary, for lack of a better term, of him supposedly accidentally drowning on Monday. So, Anyway, William Colby, he was forced to resign as Director of Central Intelligence. And just, a lot of stuff was going on after Watergate and everything else. So Daddy Bush ended up becoming DCI, Director of Central Intelligence, and William Barr was working for Daddy Bush when he was at CIA. So when Daddy Bush became Vice President and then later President, the Iran-Contra scandal, thanks to a fellow Marine who got shot down over Nicaragua, Eugene Hassenfuss, when they started finding out all the people's names in his little black book, Reagan was already suffering so badly from Alzheimer's, they weren't going to go after Reagan. But Daddy Bush and a whole lot of other people, they could have very well been indicted. So William Barr goes, don't worry about it. Just pardon them all. If you pardon them, there won't be no witnesses that Congress has to go after you and the rest. So that's how Daddy Bush stayed from being impeached or going to prison connected to the Iran-Contra. That was William Barr. I say that to you because these folks from Iran-Contra, when Reagan was president, John Birch Society, most of those guys who were in the major players in Iran-Contra, John Birch Society, Trump brought those people into his administration. So when you saw Scalia down there on the ranch, and this happened before Trump became president, he was a healthy guy. They never had an autopsy on him, but he had a mysterious death down there. And then shortly afterwards, the person who replaced him on the Supreme Court, I talked about Stephen Donziger before. Donziger is a guy who filed a lawsuit on behalf of people down in South America the Amazon region was just destroyed by oil companies from the U.S. And he won millions of dollars for these folks. And then they waited till Donald Trump appointed somebody to the Supreme Court so they would have enough people to rule not only against Donziger, but they put Donziger under house arrest with an ankle bracelet, stripped him of his law degree, everything. And that's a white guy, a prominent lawyer, okay? So it ain't about a black thing, okay? And I just can't help it, the similarity between that and Pelican Brief, because Pelican Brief that has Julia Roberts and Denzel Washington was about replacing people on the Supreme Court so they can put people on the Supreme Court that will rule in favor of the corporate fascist oil companies. By the way, folks, since you all have been distracted by the black woman going on the Supreme Court, Biden right now is trying to appoint a woman in New York City to the federal appellate court who worked for those oil companies to take Donziger down. And I challenge somebody to call in and tell me I'm lying. Seriously.
All right.
Oh, by the way, and I can tell you this, folks, that black woman on the Supreme Court, she's supported by the Fraternal Order of Police. Now, Mr. Nelson, is the Fraternal Order of Police pro-black when unarmed black folks were killed by white cops?
No, they're not.
But they're one of her biggest supporters. So you guys keep jumping up and down and be happy because you got a black female on the Supreme Court.
All right, 800-450-7876. Howard's on line 1 calling from L.A. Howard, you have a question for Mark?
Oh, thank you. I'm glad you're on the call. Mark, go over that Susan John Yu killing about the Sergeant Collins. The last time I saw you was down at the protest we had for her 41st birthday. I think in 2016. Time goes by fast. And also, talk about how she was acquitted by Joyce Harlan. Remember they had a demonstration in front of her house around that time. And that's what really set people off that too, listen to the tape. And also I'd like to bring up the fact that George Holliday, I think he recently died.
Yes, he did.
When they filmed it, yeah, he recently filmed that incident. He was trying to change the other. Brandon Kelly, the first thing he filmed was that incident. And I was watching TV that night when it happened. I think it was on Channel 5. They had a breaking news story where they showed it. But the backdrop to that story was, if you correct me if I'm wrong, that he tried to give it to LAPD, and LAPD was so arrogant, they said, forget, we don't want it. So they came to Channel 5, that's how it became all over the news. Is that correct?
I'll answer that, but I have a question for you, sir. During the Cold War, did you not serve in the U.S. Air Force?
Yeah, I was at March Air Force Base, Strategic Air Command.
Strategic Air Command. And weren't you guys always on alert for the Soviet Union and doing something?
Oh, that was the whole purpose of the SAC, is being on alert, 24-hour alert.
So remember the last time we had a conversation and I told you practically everything you think you know about the Soviet Union was wrong and how the Soviet Union didn't even have an aircraft carrier?
Yeah, I was really surprised about that. But
so I'm asking you a question.
Yeah.
When you look at how Russia is performing in Ukraine, are you impressed with them militarily?
Not really.
So as I said before, Russia poses no threat to the United States. It's all hype for defense contractors to justify making more money. And all this stuff about Russia's going to launch a nuclear weapon, Putin has never said that. You're hearing that from Western media. We pull out of we pull out of Afghanistan, we pull out of Iraq. These defense contractors got to justify to their shareholders how they can make money. And they're making lots of money now because Biden is promising to give Ukraine the world. So to answer your question, Sung Ja Du, what's even worse about that trial? By the way, I have an audio tape from that trial, okay? And don't ask how I got it. And what they purposely did after that trial, where Judge Carlins, they put her out in the valley, and all she handled was juvenile cases. And if you were not actually involved in that case, you couldn't even come in her courtroom. Okay? Now, as far as George Holliday filmed the beating of Rodney King with the LAPD-4. Daddy Bush was at the White House with Daryl Gates. Daryl Gates had just left the White House where he was promised a federal appointment, either the CIA or FBI. By the time Daryl Gates landed in L.A., he had no job because Daddy Bush went on television the next day and said he and Barbara nearly threw up after watching that video. Now, you alluded to KTLA Channel 5, and I taped it live. George Holliday went over to Foothill Station, went to the desk officer and goes, hey, I got this videotape here that you guys might want. And this is what the LAPD cop said to him at the front desk. Mind your own damn business and get the hell out of here. And he upset George Holliday so much, he went straight to Channel 5 News and go, hey, you guys want this tape? So the only tape that ever existed showing the Rodney King beating, if the arrogance of LAPD cops wasn't so prevalent, they would have had the only copy, and we would have never heard about any of this. So I'm glad you said that, brother, because I never mentioned that when we were talking earlier about some of the things that led up to this. Yeah, George Holliday had the only copy. He was going to give it to the desk officer at Foothill Station who told him, man, mind your own damn business and get the hell out of here.
And there'd been no story. Thanks, Howard. Thanks for your call.
And the rest is history.
Yep. 800-450-7876. Ramon's on line 5. He's in D.C. Ramon, you have a question for Mark? Is Ramon there on line 5? All right, let's go to Ron on line 2 in West Palm Beach. Ron, you have a question for Mark?
Yes, I do. Thank you for taking my call. Mark, I'm sorry I haven't contacted you through my wife's Facebook.
I don't know what you're talking about. I know nothing.
Okay, I just have...
No, but seriously, how are you feeling?
I'm great. I'm doing great.
Because, a lot of people say COVID ain't real. So can you just tell the listeners, without getting personal, is COVID real?
COVID is definitely real. And here and there, I get some kind of terrible headaches, which I never had before.
So I understand. I see your boy DeSantis just went out and tried his first presidential campaign leg.
Oh yeah, I was going to ask you. That's one of the questions I was going to ask you. But I have 3 quick questions. I wanted to ask you about Maxwell. No one's talking about her. How come she hasn't spilled the beans yet? My second question is, I know you mentioned China as being the world power of this century. Don't they need the spear of destiny? I believe I heard you before with Dick Gregory years ago saying that the CIA has that, and whoever has that get the power. And my last question was, DeSantis picked a fight with Disney, and Disney is one of the top dogs in the media empire. Who do you see winning in that situation? And that's it, my friend.
All right, because we got very little time here, so I'll make this quick. One, the fight with Disney is fake, and nothing's going to come out of that. That whole thing is fake, and Disney ain't exactly pro-gay as a lot of folks think, because I'll just tell you, that's why Smollett got taken down. Smollett had to be taken down, and Empire had to be taken off Fox before Disney bought Fox. Most people don't even know Disney owns Fox. The only thing they don't own is Fox News. So don't think that Disney is all pro-gay like you folks are being led to believe. That's all theater. Number 2, I can't talk about Maxwell because there's too many listeners out there who get their feelings hurt. And even though I like to be brutally honest, you don't want to know what I know. Maxwell, they ain't gonna do nothing. But China is part of BRICS. This whole thing with Ukraine, the plan is for BRICS: Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa to replace the U.S. dollar as the world's #1 currency. Putin already has started telling people anybody who buys natural gas or oil from Russia has to repay him in rubles. That's causing the U.S. dollar's value to go down while causing the Russian ruble to go up in value. And they're also going into cryptocurrency. That's what this war is about, because the U.S. is on its last legs, as both Deutsche Bank and even Goldman Sachs now have come out and said we're going to be in a major recession by this time next year, if not sooner. Which I'll tell you, there ain't no recession. We've been in recession for the last 10 years. It'll be a depression. So when Biden puts out those sanctions, all it does is hurt the poor, and it's going to hurt us more than the people who he claims is going to hurt. So, it's sad, but that's where we're headed.
Thanks, Ron.
All right.
See if we can get another call for you. 800-450-7876. Taboo in D.C. You have a question for Mark?
I do, but please don't cut me off. You promise not to cut me off, Carl?
No, you gotta make it quick. We run the clock. It's
okay,
not
good.
me, it's the computer.
Carl. Oh my goodness. My question is, which is worse, not having the right to vote or having your vote stolen from you? That's the first question. And the second question is, are spike proteins growing on the red blood cells of many people who have gotten the so-called vaccine?
All right, well, this will be easy for me. I'll take the first one because I'm not a medical expert and will never claim to be, and I don't have enough information to even remotely try to answer the second question. But the first question, that's a rhetorical question because I'm sure everybody philosophically can say, I'd rather have the right to vote so I can choose to use it when I can versus not having the right to vote and being stolen. But, folks, I'm going to tell you straight out, stealing votes has been a thing in this country from day one, and both parties have always done it.
Well, we're out of time. Thanks, Mark. All right, folks, we got to run. Stay strong, stay positive. Please stay healthy. We'll see you tomorrow at 4 o'clock right here on FM 95.9 and AM 1450. WOL, where information is power.
about you taking your medicine? Oh, every day, morning, the nighttime. Okay? You always have someone to make sure you're taking your medicine every day and every night. But that's every day, Mr. Dan. No. You do it every day and make sure you do it every day. But you forget. No. You forget. Next day. You forget you take your medicine. Mr. Jack, this is what I'm trying to explain to you. If I give you medicine right now, you'll come back at 10 o'clock and say, I didn't take my medicine. No, at night, you'll say, I didn't take my medicine. Yes, it has, Mr. Jack. It hasn't been so many days. You take your medicine. Your medicine is in the front, and make sure you do it every day and every night. Every day, every night. See, this is why it's so dangerous, Mr. Jack. I'm not going to go over this over again, okay? Just listen to me. All right? You will have a memory problem, short-term memory. When something happens, you forget. And then you'll think, I haven't taken my medicine. But you forgot you know. Mr. Daniel, you don't have to start right now. You do it every day. You already do it every day. Mr. Daniel, you took your medicine last night. Yes. Yes, sir. And you today you took this morning. Yes. And tonight after dinner you will get it again. You don't have to ask her. We ask you to come take your medicine. Don't worry about it, man. We gonna take care of you. Don't worry about it. We're gonna take care of you. Wait for you to take care of yourself. There. No. Let me lay on. Oh, do you need a wish? I wanted to teach you stuff. No, I didn't say nothing about opening the doors. Cups are in the garage. That's why I told him just tell you to come in. And they didn't do that. You didn't tell me you let me in. Who? You belong here. What's your name? You belong here? Yeah, we'll put your hoodie on. He in the driveway all the time. Thank you. Got one thing left. The only thing I got left is they said his car was doing 120 something miles per hour. The top speed for that car is 85. Go figure. Have yourself an amazing day.